Remember that iconic sunflower? On my phone, I had pages and pages of apps to pass the time in the schoolyard. But the one I loved more than anything was Plants vs. Zombies. I spent hours fending off wave after wave of the undead by planting cherries, mushrooms, or what was that other plant anyway? A bean. I wasn't alone. In 17 years, 600 million people downloaded Plants vs. Zombies. It became an App Store phenomenon alongside Angry Birds, Jetpack Joyride, and Subway Surfers, establishing itself as one of the first pillars of mobile gaming. Naively, I thought that was pretty much it, a relic of my childhood that had faded into obscurity. Absolutely not. Plants vs. Zombies is an iceberg, still boasting over 50 million active players every month. From a fun little tower defense game made by one guy in his spare time, it evolved into something much bigger. But today, it's not quite the same. Poor management, corporate acquisition, and numerous problems have led fans to consider the latest Plants vs. Zombies games among the worst of their decade, an affront to the beloved franchise. So, what exactly happened? I'm Theramik, and today, I'm telling you the complete story of Plants vs. Zombies, where it came from, why it was so successful, how it transformed into something entirely different, and what that says about the video game industry. Where did Plants vs. Zombies come from? The game's concept is, admittedly, bizarre. You're peacefully at home when a zombie apocalypse breaks out, and instead of, say, grabbing a gun, your neighbor tells you, "No, don't worry, here are some seeds." How does one arrive at such a concept? To understand that, we need to go back to its creator, George Fan. In 2000, at 22 years old, George graduated with a computer science degree from the University of California, Berkeley. He was a passionate gamer, and for years, he had been imagining game concepts in his spare time. So, instead of pursuing a traditional career, he started developing small Java games for Price Games.com, an old, now defunct website full of mini-games, much like dozens of others from the early millennium. His very first creation was called Wrath of the Gopher, a puzzle game where a gopher had to eat an entire field without retracing its path. If you failed, well, it was amusing but clearly homemade, and you quickly exhausted its replayability. The first title for which he truly gained recognition was Insanaquarium, a well-designed aquarium simulator where you could buy different species of fish that you had to feed to earn money. In return, you could buy even more fish, unlock new species, and defend them from alien attacks because, as aliens do, they regularly opened portals to wreak havoc. It was quite simple, all controlled by the mouse, but it was captivating enough that in 2002, it made him a finalist at the Independent Games Festival. Until then, George had doubts about his career path, but this was a confirmation. His destiny was to be a game designer. He then approached PopCap, a small publisher specializing in puzzle games at the time, which first offered him an official release of his game, then invited him to join them to develop another. George hesitated. At the same time, he had just been hired by Blizzard to work on Diablo 3. He had managed to code Insanaquarium in his free time, but felt that juggling both would demand too much energy. Should he stay in the security of a large studio, or take the risk of making his own games? After a few months, George finally decided. Feeling more like a designer than a mere developer, he left Blizzard and truly entered the world of independent game development. Nevertheless, he kept one thing from his time at Blizzard: his passion for Warcraft 3. This real-time strategy game was the ancestor of World of Warcraft, and indirectly, Dota 2, League of Legends, and many others. It was, by far, one of the most influential games of its generation, particularly for all the community-made mods. These ranged from simple rebalancing or graphical updates to much more complex creations that added new adventures, or, for example, transformed the game into a tower defense. You'd place turrets along a long line to shoot at a horde of enemies. It was fun, and the idea stuck with George. He liked it, but he thought, instead of mindlessly marching along a line, what if the enemies directly attacked your defenses? Originally, he wanted to use this concept for an Insanaquarium sequel. The problem was, fish move, and that's not practical for defending a fixed point. So, what grows and doesn't move? Plants. For the enemies, He initially planned to reuse the aliens from Insaniquarium, but that didn't quite work either. In fact, George found Warcraft 3's tower defense mods too complex and oddly paced, full of downtime and frustrating moments where the AI creatures didn't do what you wanted. He wanted something simpler, with clear, straight lines, constant gameplay, no pauses. You're always thinking, but it couldn't be too fast, or it wouldn't be fun. So, what represents both slowness and consistency? Zombies. And for me, this is the first great strength of George's idea. Everything starts with the gameplay. When you explain the concept to someone unfamiliar with video games, they look at you strangely. Plants attacking zombies. What kind of concept is that? But in the middle of a game, it feels perfectly logical. Just like the first Mario game, everything is explained intuitively. As soon as you start, you immediately understand what you need to do. George explained in a conference that anyone could play his game. He had so much confidence in his game design that the in-game almanac even features a humorous note from the zombies themselves. To win, whatever you do, don't touch anything. Signed, the zombies. This prototype clearly had potential. With PopCap's support, George assembled a small team. Todd Sample helped with programming. Rich Werner drew the initial concept art, while Laura Shigehara composed the game's iconic theme. They laid the foundations of the gameplay, defined the levels, and brainstormed names. Early ideas included Weedlings, Zombie and Grass, and Get Your Green On. The one that resonated most was Lawn of the Dead, a playful nod to George Romero's cult zombie film, Dawn of the Dead. However, this posed copyright issues. George even sent Romero a video of himself dressed as a zombie programmer, asking for permission to use the name, but without success. It's a shame that video isn't public. I'd pay good money to see that. Finally, after 3 years of work, on May 5, 2009, the team opted for simplicity and released Plants vs. Zombies. You start very simply with 1 lane, then 3, then 5, and zombies slowly advancing towards you from the other side of your garden. Suns regularly fall from the sky. Collect them to gain enough energy to grow your plants. You begin by placing a row of sunflowers, which also produce suns, then pea shooters that fire peas to destroy zombies. Or, if you have a lot of sun, you can deploy a cherry bomb that explodes, instantly killing all surrounding zombies. At the end of each level, if you survive the final wave, you unlock a new plant, like the walnut that serves as a barrier, the chomper that swallows zombies whole, or the ice pea with seeds that slow down monsters. Between levels, you can build your roster of plants. Each plant has a cooldown before you can plant another. So, do you prefer to fill the field with cheap small sprouts, or wait and deploy more powerful plants? On the other side, you also face different types of zombies. Those with a cone or bucket on their heads have more health, while the pole vaulting zombie, for example, can leap over the first plant it encounters. Each level thus pushes you to try different combinations to survive increasingly large waves. To help you, there's Crazy Dave, your eccentric neighbor. He regularly offers advice or sells you upgrades for your plants. He's even based on Dave Roll, a former PopCap employee. I'm not sure how I'd feel about that. Sometimes, instead of collecting suns, certain levels feature a conveyor belt that brings you random plants or walnuts for bowling. It's a fun way to liven up the gameplay. And just when you think you've seen it all, you move on to night levels. Suns no longer fall. You can only rely on your sunflowers and mushrooms. An entirely different defensive roster with new powers. After that, you transition to the backyard, with a swimming pool in the middle, which requires you to first place lily pads before you can put a plant in the lane. It gets even more complicated when the snorkel zombie can pass underwater, avoiding projectiles. Then, as night falls, half the level plunges into fog, making it impossible to know where the zombies are coming from. Finally, in the last levels, you must defend your roof. First, you need to place pots to put your plants, which can also be stolen by Bungie zombies if you're not careful. While the first half of the game is quite relaxed, it truly ramps up towards the end. You face gigantic zombies, massive health sponges that devour defenses. In the final level, on the roof at night, you confront Dr. Zomboss. Aboard his giant robot, he sends an army of zombies and crushes your plants with a minivan. After almost 10 minutes, you finally defeat him. Victory. You've repelled the invasion, and you're rewarded with an adorable little video clip. Plants vs. Zombies is truly comprehensive. In addition to the main adventure, you also have puzzles, a survival mode, and even a Zen garden just to tend to your plants. By the way, excellent idea. I spent hours on that. Was it perhaps my safe space? All of this came with a distinct art style. The zombies are very recognizable, the plants even more so, and I really liked the menus. I found them incredibly clean. You could feel a lot of love went into Plants vs. Zombies, and people adored it, even if, for now, not many had heard of it. Initially, the game was only available on Mac and PC, with even a physical version. It was a decent launch, nothing more. But a year later, everything changed when PopCap made the best decision of its life and published the game on iOS. With its simple and clear concept, short but intense sessions, and rewards that regularly transformed the gameplay, Plants vs. Zombies was perfect for mobile gaming, especially in 2010. Apple had only opened the App Store less than 2 years prior, and it was far less crowded, with barely 100,000 apps available. Games were rare, and good games even rarer. PopCap's smart move was to lower the price. From $20 on PC, it dropped to just $3. This placed it just below the competition, and it worked. PvZ became the highest-rated game on the App Store overnight. Within the first 9 days, it reached over 300,000 downloads, generating, for those counting, $1 million. By the end of the year, it hit the 1 million copies sold mark. It was PopCap's biggest success by far, and the consecration of George Fan. He was notably nominated at the 2010 Golden Joystick Awards, where he won both Download Game of the Year and Strategy Game of the Year. Everyone agreed that Plants vs. Zombies was engaging, effective, a true gem of game design. I played it with my friends during school breaks. It was incredible. We spent hours in survival mode, trying to last as long as possible. What a time. Yeah, we probably got yelled at, but what a time. In the years that followed, it was released everywhere, on all phone versions, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo DS, PS Vita. Plants vs. Zombies permeated popular culture. It even spawned a whole series of clones and counterfeits, most of them very cheap, shamelessly stealing the concept and cramming it with ads. There were some funny spin-offs though, like being able to play Plants vs. Zombies within World of Warcraft. Cool, yes. And speaking of which, there's even a Magic the Gathering card referencing the game Grave Bramble, a plant with protection from zombies. A fantastic tribute, given George's own passion for magic. He was even invited to design a card for them. Online, you can also find PvZ creepypastas, theories like Crazy Dave actually being a zombie, and my personal favorite, mashups of the main theme with Billie Eilish's Bad Guy. It's real. People thought I was crazy for years, but she herself confirmed it. In the early 2010s, Plants vs. Zombies was a sensation. Adored by everyone, one of the App Store's flagships, to the point where it attracted the attention of a very large company. Do you know Electronic Arts? The Plants vs. Zombies explosion. A bit of context. In 2010, EA wasn't yet the sprawling behemoth we know today. Well, actually, yes, it was. The year before, they had laid off 2,600 people and closed several of their branches. They were half vampires, semi-demons, you get the idea. Anyway, at that moment, Electronic Arts wanted to diversify. They sensed that the future of video games was on mobile, and they wanted a piece of that rapidly growing pie. They first acquired Chilingo, the distributor of Angry Birds and Cut the Rope, for $20 million, and then turned their attention to PopCap. They were very keen to buy it, but at that time, PopCap was truly riding high, and the company was worth approximately $750 million. I don't know if you realize the enormity of that sum. It's the GDP of Dominica. The equivalent of what the entire Caribbean island nation produces in 1 year was spent to acquire Plants vs. Zombies. Of course, PopCap also had other quite profitable games like Bejeweled, Zuma, and Peggle. And how good is Peggle? Clearly, it was George Fan's game that commanded such a sum. EA didn't see it as a simple game, but as their gateway into the digital universe, and their goal, to monetize their acquisition by creating a true franchise. Their first attempt was PvZ Adventures, a Farmville clone where you had to defend your plants from zombies. It was released, not necessarily bad, but just a bit odd. Let's say it was in vogue at the time. They also surprisingly released Chinese versions of PvZ, made by PopCap's Shanghai branch, adapted to the country's standards, like Plants vs. Zombies, Great Wall Edition. Today, all of these have been removed from the App Store, but it's a curious little footnote in the game's history. In the West, we saw a ton of toys, a Plants vs. Zombies arcade game, and even a comic book series recounting the adventures of the franchise's characters. But EA's true first major step arrived in 2013 with Plants vs. Zombies 2, and I'll be honest, I was ready to vent all my frustration, especially seeing the new art style. But in reality, it's a good game. More plants, more zombies, more levels, more of everything. You travel through time across different eras and discover many new mechanics. For example, plant food power-ups that temporarily boost your plants when you feed them. This sometimes makes the game a tad too simple, but it's cool to see, and I know I'll be in the minority, but I actually like the change in art direction. It's subtle, and I also appreciate the new music and animations that invigorate the sometimes rigid aesthetic of the first opus. Plants vs. Zombies 2 is a good game, full of good things that build upon the ideas of the first. The only problem is that EA isn't there to make good games. They're there to make money. Where PvZ 1 was quite honest, you could unlock everything by playing normally. PvZ 2 is riddled with microtransactions. Yes, on one hand the game is free, but on the other, you have boosters to buy, exclusive plants, stats to improve. A true pay-to-win system, with even plants and levels inaccessible unless you spend real money, making it almost a pay-to-play experience. Consequently, in the free version, you only have 6 plants available. So, be prepared to shell out at least $20 to unlock everything. It's the typical freemium model, and even if you don't pay, there are ads everywhere. Before, after every level, it's unbearable. While such practices are common today, and we've seen much worse since, at the time, it was still very new. In-app purchases were only launched by Apple in 2009, and they immediately caused problems. You started seeing the first scandals, like a Smurfs game that, after only 15 minutes, offered you to buy a $99 pack to progress faster. The result? A child spent $1,400 before their parents realized what was happening. At the time, it was the Wild West. There were no disclaimers, and I even remember getting caught myself and spending $200 on Dragonvale, a terrible game at that. Dad, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but it's a lucrative business, and EA loves it. Between the introduction of FIFA points in FIFA 13 and a Day 1 DLC announced for Mass Effect 3, we felt they were increasingly seeing us as cash cows rather than players. And even though, with 25 million downloads in just the first 2 weeks, PvZ 2 was a commercial success, players were not happy. In addition to giving PvZ 2 lower ratings because of this, in 2012, players voted EA the worst company in America for, and I quote, poor management, high game prices, and false in-game promises. The creator of Plants vs. Zombies was openly against this economic model. He wanted his game to be a complete experience, not a machine designed to extract your money. In fact, he barely worked on PvZ2 and preferred to focus on other parallel projects. Overall, the collaboration with EA went poorly. George no longer felt at home. He still saw himself as an independent creator, but he was trapped within such a large company whose vision he no longer shared. The final nail in the coffin. In the summer of 2012, still in a masterful management move, EA laid off a significant portion of PopCap's original staff, including George and his team. Despite rumors, he wasn't fired because he was against microtransactions, but I suppose that couldn't have helped. Plants vs. Zombies 2 thus marked the turning point from a small, heartfelt game to an industrial machine, and this was only the beginning. The new Plants vs. Zombies. If you're wondering what you're looking at, don't worry, you're not alone. In 2014, everyone was perplexed when EA announced the surprising sequel to Plants vs. Zombies, Garden Warfare. Initially an Xbox exclusive, it was a 3D third-person team shooter with different classes of plants and zombies, each with their own powers. It was clearly riding the hype of modern warfare, the Call of Duty brand, and all the shooters that dominated that era. But even George Fan, who was still at PopCap when it was being developed, was perplexed. We really weren't sure what it would turn out to be. We half expected something soulless and mediocre, but surprisingly it was actually very good. With its dynamism and goofy, colorful atmosphere, Garden Warfare was ultimately closer to the vibe of Paladins or Overwatch. And the Sunflower. It's literally Bastion, actually. From the start it was fun, but it wasn't just a shooter with a PvZ skin. It took the iconic plants and zombies from the first games and integrated their specificities into their classes. For example, the cactus became a sniper who could plant potato mines behind them, while the chomper could swallow opponents to immobilize them. Everything revolved around the classes, each with several modes and upgrades that you unlocked as you played. This created a very asymmetrical but really well-functioning gameplay. Depending on the map you were on, you had to adapt your team to take advantage of your environment. It was really enjoyable. In the end, the matches were explosive, while remaining strategic and favoring cooperation. While the main mode was Team Deathmatch, you also had Attack Defend, or Gardens and Graveyards, a sort of tower defense where you repelled waves of zombies by shooting them, but also by growing other plants to help you. It was very pleasant and kept the spirit of the base game while adapting it for a different audience. The only frustrating thing was that the plants you grew had to first be opened in boosters. It remained EA, and they quickly integrated microtransactions everywhere, but it was still manageable. You still had ways to earn enough in-game currency. To everyone's surprise, Garden Warfare was both a critical and commercial success. 8 million players in 1 year, with all the biggest YouTubers of the moment trying it out. So much so that barely 2 years later, EA announced the sequel. I don't have much to say about Garden Warfare 2. It was an upgrade of the first, with some new plants and zombies, a highly anticipated solo campaign by the community, even if it was quite repetitive, and game modes that rotated weekly to increase replayability. Are you listening, Master Duel? Every week, not once every 2 months. Every week for game modes. Okay. It also featured a large central hub with a map full of secrets and minigames to discover. It was very enjoyable. Garden Warfare 2 was therefore quite comprehensive. It was just difficult to see everything. Leveling up all characters and their variants took a really long time, and many upgrades were only obtainable in boosters, with currency that was earned much slower, encouraging you to spend real money. Fortunately, if you had played the first game, you could transfer your progress to the second. But for new players, the free-to-play experience was quite laborious. Despite all this, Garden Warfare 2 was still quite well received, even better than the first. EA had succeeded in its gamble. It had transformed Plants vs. Zombies into a huge franchise that attracted millions of players across all platforms. They continued their momentum with PvZ Heroes, a card game in the same vein as Clash Royale. Apparently, it's not too bad, but nothing special. I personally wasn't inspired by it. From that point on, their goal was clear: maintain the pace, release game after game, ever faster, for ever more profitability. And that's where the first cracks began to appear. The fall of Plants vs. Zombies. On September 4, 2019, PvZ Battle for Neighborville was released. Unofficially Garden Warfare 3, it was eagerly awaited by many fans who rushed to their controllers and were met with a rude awakening. It felt the same as the launch of Overwatch 2. Everything was gone, only one game mode, many character variations no longer present. They had removed half the content. This might be explained by the rather short production time. 3 years, even for a sequel, is little. Online, many people pointed out texture bugs and optimization errors, but these were far from the only problems. What remained didn't work either. In fact, the entire foundation of Garden Warfare was asymmetric gameplay. However, if the balancing isn't perfect, some classes simply become complete counters to others, and your game turns into rock, paper, scissors. Even worse when your best characters are stuck behind paywalls. Otherwise, be prepared to farm for months to unlock even a single one, and the base game itself cost $30. It was scandalous. In fact, I felt that EA was already at their breaking point. They had been abusing microtransactions for a long time, but until then, they had been somewhat saved by the quality of their games. Not anymore. Battle for Neighborville was both a critical and commercial disappointment, particularly for Garden Warfare fans, because barely a year later, EA announced that, well, too bad. It didn't work, so they were shutting down the servers and ending support for the game. Great for those who had shelled out almost $100 for it. Fantastic. Instead, the company decided to return to its roots and announced Plants vs. Zombies 3. It was released in 2019, 7 years after the second. And how did they manage to mess it up right from the first trailer? Wait, why is it vertical? Guys, your lanes are horizontal, and we know how to rotate our phones. What are you doing? Everything is cramped and bad, and it's ugly. Not only is it light years away from the original art style, but no, it's just plain ugly. These ugly 3D models just don't work at all. I mean, compare the Pea Shooter with the one from PvZ2, then the one from PvZ1. We're evolving backward. Above all, it's incredibly boring. Plants vs. Zombies has always been repetitive by nature, but the joy was that at the end of each level, you got a new plant, a bonus, a surprise. But here, no, because all of that is kept for microtransactions. And even without that, everything has been oversimplified. Strategy has disappeared. You just tap buttons without thinking. There aren't even any sunflowers. Well, there are, but you can't plant them. They automatically fill your sun meter because I'm a baby who can't play video games. Tower defense is too hard for me, or PvZ3. It got slammed by everyone. But it's a pre-alpha. It won't be the final game. Don't worry. When it's finished, it'll be so much better. We're so proud of our game that we're soft launching it in Ireland, Romania, and the Philippines. The rest of the world. No, but we're proud of our game. They were so proud that barely a few months later, they deleted it, removed it entirely from the App Store, and started from scratch. So a year later, in September 2021, here we go again. This is the new PvZ3. First, thank you. It's horizontal, and there are sunflowers. Yes, the sun bar is there. It looks a bit better. I can open my eyes without crying, but I think that's all they had time for. A year to rebuild an entire game isn't enough. You get through the levels in a few hours. Fewer zombies, fewer plants that you can't even choose for your team anymore. And the worst part is, they added lives. You know, one of the worst microtransaction models on the market. When you die, you lose a life, and when you run out, you either wait or pay. Just let me play your damn game. In fact, you could tell that this time, they weren't super proud of the final product of this PvZ3 2.0 either, because it was only released in Australia and the Philippines. Again, it was roasted, so 3 months later, they removed it, then put it back, then removed it again in a loop. It's endless. In 2024, the game returned with the subtitle, Welcome to Zomburbia, but it's the same thing. Sure, there are a few extra bits, but not really what we wanted. Like, you have a bit of a story, a mode to upgrade your house, but nothing that fixes the central gameplay problems. And again, it was only released in a few countries before disappearing forever. 6 years later, it still hasn't officially launched, and for us, it's as if the franchise is dead. All that's left is the first game, which is still excellent. It's superb, hasn't aged a day, but even that, EA is taking away from us. Discreetly, they removed the original PvZ from the App Store and forced users to switch to a new version designed to extract your money. For example, normally you have lawnmowers, your last line of defense when a zombie reaches your door. Very practical. Well, now, if you want them, you have to watch ads. Or sometimes the game is a bit slow. But don't worry, there's a button to play it at 2x speed, and that button is in a $7 pack. The speed button costs more than the base game. I'm going to explode. Fortunately, you can still find the original version of the game, especially on PC, but it clearly shows how little EA cares. That's why I was surprised when, in 2025, they announced Plants vs. Zombies, Replanted, a remaster of the original. And it's not such a bad idea. The game has aged very well, but it's true that a complete, definitive version that would gather every peculiarity, every minigame from every port, would be cool. Unfortunately, that's not what it is at all. Firstly, the game costs $20. Inflation, I get it, but there's a limit, right? If it were the same price, I'd say, well, if it's the same, it's fine. It's a clone of the old one. That's life. But here, I had expectations, and I was disappointed. Apparently, making a version that brought all the others together was too ambitious. The minigames are half there, and many are missing. Yes, okay, the DS ones were played with a stylus. It's a bit complicated, but I don't know. You could have adapted them in your $20 remaster. You have some new features, like clouds that temporarily prevent sunflowers from producing suns. But it's not very fun. It just slows down the game for no reason, without making it more strategic, since you can't really play around it. And above all, it's not really Plants vs. Zombies. At first glance, it might seem like I'm exaggerating. The two games are almost identical, but not completely. For example, there are no shadows behind the plants, and that might seem like a small detail, but when you have 20 pea shooters on a green background, it was useful. It feels less polished. There are small graphical bugs. I have the impression they didn't understand what they were adapting, and I'm not alone in this opinion. On Twitter, Laura Shigehara explained that in the original version, the music she composed arrived gradually. As you progressed through the level, more instruments were added to build tension until the final wave. But here, no. You get big drums right away, even when you only have one row of sunflowers. It makes no sense. A real lack of consideration. The people behind Replanted did not work with the original team. They just took their work without understanding it. This is especially visible in the graphics. The game is in 16:9, so larger than the original 4:3 version, but instead of going to Rich Werner, who created those iconic designs, and asking him to redraw them, no, they used AI to upscale them, then traced over. In addition to the ethical question, this creates problems. Like, this is not a hand. But don't worry, to make you believe they worked hard on the game, in the bonuses, they included fake concept art and fake early concepts. The disrespect, the epitome of laziness. Instead of extending the background, I don't know, by showing the street, they put a big bush. Are you kidding me? On the roof, it's a PNG. When I say it's no longer Plants vs. Zombies, this is what I mean. The game has no soul left. It's no longer that gem of game design, full of charm, jokes, and Easter eggs made by a group of passionate individuals. It's a puppet, a command from a company with only one goal: to use player nostalgia to steal their money. In a sense, the Plants vs. Zombies we knew disappeared long ago, the minute EA got its hands on it. Today, it feels like it's dead, but not completely, because if there's one thing that remains very much alive, it's the community. While no one expects anything from Electronic Arts anymore, the game still holds its place in pop culture. On the App Store, it still boasts very good statistics, and online, people remember it. Some do PvZ challenges, like finishing the game without sun. Others create fan art and decorations, or cosplay. Even the creators are getting involved, like Laura Shigehara, who released her own animated miniseries set in the universe. Seriously, go check it out. It's adorable. It's incredibly cool that fans are reappropriating the game to the point of making it their own. I was shocked by the number of amateur games based on Plants vs. Zombies. From clones that tweak a few details to those that radically change the gameplay, you can find everything. Even a game of chess or this guy who recreated it on a Raspberry Pi. All of this in a very indie, homemade atmosphere, close to that of the development of the first Plants vs. Zombies. The loop is complete. Even now, every day, thousands of people are having fun on Plants vs. Brainrot, and saying that phrase takes days off my life. It's one of the most popular maps on Roblox, accumulating 850,000 concurrent players at its peak, and 1 billion visits in just 2 weeks. This shows the incredible strength of the original game's premise, or perhaps the fact that everyone loves Brainrot. I choose to ignore that information. Speaking of the base game, some take it and modify it to create mods, and one in particular is PvZ Fusion. It's all in the title. You merge several plants to create new, more powerful ones. The concept is excellent, visually attractive, and maintains the game's foundations while bringing novelty. It garnered tens of millions of views on YouTube, to the point where, last year, the PvZ team changed direction again and released Plants vs. Zombies Evolved. Same concept. You make combinations, they don't even hide it. And honestly, it's good. The game isn't perfect, but it's clearly better than anything we've had so far. Ironic, for all the money EA has poured into the franchise, the answer comes from the fans, from people who love the game and respect what it stands for. After all, PvZ started as a small independent game, and that's what George and his team wanted to remain. Once he left PopCap, he created Octogeddon during a game jam, a very bizarre but somewhat funny game about an octopus that gains all sorts of arms. He then founded All Yes Good, his own small development studio with several members of his old team. Since then, he has released Harley Wombat, a small puzzle platformer about a wombat that makes cubic poop. The game is well rated, so why not? Again, you can feel his touch as a game designer, someone who thinks about the game primarily through gameplay. From the beginning, this was the strength of Plants vs. Zombies, a proposition so strong, so timeless, that even today, when I'm far less bored than I was in the schoolyard, I still pull it out from time to time. There's something beautiful about it. I've grown, I've changed, but I know I'll always love this game.